supplications to that almighty being who rules over the universe. Washington continued, "No people can be bound to acknowledge and adore the invisible hand which conducts the affairs of men more than the people of the United States. Every step by which they have advanced to the character of an independent nation seems to have been distinguished by some token of providential agency."
This has been an American Minute with Bill Federer. For a free transcript, call American Minute at 1-888-USA-WORD.
VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
We do thank you for joining us here every day on Crosstalk as we hit the issues that are impacting us here in the States and around the world as well. And if you have been keeping your eye on what's taking place, you will recognize that globalism is on the march. It is happening politically, it's happening economically, and yes, ladies and gentlemen, it's even happening spiritually. Our guest today is going to provide an overview of what is taking place to advance globalism. With us, we welcome back Gary Kah. He is a founder and director of Hope for the World, editor of Hope for the World Update. He is also a former government trade specialist and an author. He is the former Europe and Middle East trade specialist for the Indiana state government. Gary, thank you for joining us here today.
Hi, Jim. It's always good to be with you.
And just before we talk about this globalism update, I know you've been monitoring what's been going on with Russia and Ukraine. Give us your analysis of what we see unfolding here at this time.
Yeah, this has been of a special concern to me for some time. We have a lot of friends in Ukraine. We have some friends in Russia as well. My book, In Route to Global Occupation, was actually translated into Russian in Kiev and published there by a Christian publisher, and it went out from there throughout Ukraine and into Russia to Christian leaders and so we support a couple of ministries there as well. And my son's best friend is a pastor's son from Kiev. So we're plugged into this in every which way and are very concerned about the developments over there, of course. And just to walk through the events of the last 24 hours quickly, today Russia declared the Donetsk and Luhansk regions as independent states, giving him, therefore, a right to go in and fully possess those areas. There's a high percentage of Russian people who live in those areas, and so Putin's been able to use that to kind of set the stage. In response, Germany's Prime Minister Scholz has canceled the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, at least temporarily. A lot of people thought that has already come online. It has not. No natural gas has actually flowed through that, so it's not that huge of a deal yet. So it's not really taking money away from Russia. It's just preventing them from receiving future money if this continues. President Zelensky of Ukraine has called on the EU countries and the NATO countries to stand with Ukraine and to punish Russia. The U.S. Embassy has been moved over the last couple of days from Kiev to Poland, which I was surprised to see the U.S. pull out of Ukraine that quickly. And then just in the last half hour, President Biden announced several sanctions against Russia, basically blocking them out of the international financial realm, and also announcing that the U.S. is putting troops into the Baltic states. And so things are really ratcheting up. Mm-hmm. This is how major wars start. And so far there hasn't been much bloodshed, thankfully, but that could change very soon, even within the next 24 to 48 hours. Jim, I've evaluated this every way I know how and prayerfully. And to me it seems that the West has really set the stage for Putin to do this. they've given him the excuse to go into Ukraine. Let me explain how. Since World War II, the Russian doctrine has been to have a country, a buffer country, all the way around its western perimeter so that it can never again be overrun like it was by Hitler during Nazi Germany. Russia lost millions of people in that war. And so little by little, they've seen, Poland, the Baltic states, and others join NATO. And Ukraine is kind of the last country, and with the biggest population in that area. And by talking so much about bringing Ukraine into NATO and all that talk, it seems to me that there's been an effort almost to provoke Russia. Picture with me, for example, if Russia came over to our hemisphere and announced one day that Canada is now going to be one of their allies, and they were also moving toward taking Mexico as an ally against the U.S. How would the U.S. respond to that? And by NATO being so adamant, and the president of Ukraine as well, I think that has given Putin the excuse to give to his people back home for why he needs to go in and take Ukraine in order to keep it as a buffer, a type of buffer country in case Russia is ever invaded. So whether all that's true or not, the perception of it is. It gives him a platform to stand on and to do this. And for the sake of the Ukrainian people and to avoid bloodshed, I believe their best recourse would have been to go a similar path as Finland. Finland is very pro-West. They have strong business dealings with the West, very high standard of living, but they've never really been a threat to Russia. Russia knows that Finland is not going to invade Russia. But when NATO is talking about bringing Ukraine into their circles, and then with that comes planting missiles in Ukraine perhaps that are aimed at Russia, that's where Putin draws the line. And so we're seeing him act on that now. Now, I'm not wanting to give Putin some type of support in doing what he's doing. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that all the actions of the West over the last number of years, especially in the last few months under the Biden administration, have set the stage to make this possible.
Probably would not have seen actions like this under a President Trump administration, would we?
No. Trump was unpredictable, and a lot of people didn't like that, but that's the point. A lot of people didn't like that, including his enemies. They didn't know how to measure him, and that was a good thing. Putin understood where Trump stood, and Trump also, he did not push hard to try to bring Ukraine into NATO. He kind of left that alone. But Biden reactivated that, and there's more to it than just that. Right. I believe, this is just my personal take and opinion, I believe the globalists realize that their time is kind of running out because people are waking up on this whole COVID mess and all the mandatory restrictions that have been placed on us, and people are catching on to that and realizing this is part of a bigger globalist Great Reset agenda. And so now the West, the globalists in the West, they need another crisis. And whenever you have a war like this, anything that happens in and during the war and in the aftermath can be blamed on that war. Yep. So let's say as a result of these sanctions that we are in the process of placing on Russia, now there is a sudden cyber attack against our financial institutions by Russia and China, or for that matter, by neither ones. It could be our own intelligence, for all we know, that unleashed this, but it could be blamed on Russia and be couched as being the result of this war that we're now in. And so suddenly banking institutions are shut down, things begin to spin out of control. Biden could declare martial law. I mean, these are all very real possibilities, and those are my bigger concerns. It's what may come out of this situation and how the globalists use it to advance their agenda. toward a cashless society, a digital currency, which they really want.
You know, folks, just think about this. I mean, rising gas prices. Oh, no, that's Russia's fault because of what's happening with Ukraine. Our inflation rates here across the United States. No, that's Russia's fault because of the invasion, the supply chain. All Russia's fault. And this is really a means, really, Gary, for the president to deflect failings within his administration and to transfer those over to the Russian invasion on Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly. And he's done some really foolish things, unless it's been intentional, which it could very well be. I don't believe Biden is moving on his own. He's surrounded by people who are much smarter and very devoted to the cause of globalization. Moving forward with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, giving Germany the go-ahead and Russia a few months back helped set the stage for this, too. And then the U.S. not being energy independent anymore. I mean, just months ago, under Trump, we were exporting our energy and had become completely independent. If we imported anything from anywhere else, it's because we chose to do so, but not because we had to. Mm-hmm. Well, now, as a result of Biden's actions, we are once again dependent on countries overseas. He's restricted the flow of oil. Clamped down on fracking, put up a lot of red tape that President Trump had removed. And so, I mean, we could solve this in a moment. Within 2 months, again, we could be energy independent. 2 to 3 months probably if Biden reverted back to the previous policies. But again, it doesn't appear that that's the intent. The intent is to drive up oil prices, causing inflation, causing a deterioration in our economy and America's independence, and making us more interdependent upon the rest of the world. And that's straight out of the internationalist playbook. So I'm very suspect about the way this whole scenario with Russia and Ukraine has been set up, and I think it's going to be used by globalists to advance their agenda. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind about that.
Gary Kyle with us today, founder and director of Hope for the World. And some days ago, I mean, we invited Gary to come on the program and talk about this march toward globalism. And this is a classic case of what is taking place at this time. But Gary, we're going to kind of break this down. And certainly what we see with Ukraine's kind of fitting into this formula here today, too. But we know that globalism on the march, it's happening on many fronts. I mean, this push toward globalism never takes a break in this world. But if we could further examine what's going on politically to advance globalism.
Well, the globalists have someone in power right now who's very weak and feeble. They can pretty much push him around. And part of the reason for that is President Biden, unfortunately, is very blackmailable. There is so much evidence of just ridiculous levels of corruption between he and China, and between Hunter and China and Ukraine and other countries. The money that's come into that family in ways that are completely illegal. Truth be told, he could literally be in jail as a criminal right now if they enforce the laws. But instead, they'd rather be able to use him and to blackmail him to doing certain things. And so that was a huge step, just the fact that Biden got elected and took Kamala Harris as his vice president and is completely surrounded by people who are committed to the cause of socialism. Even some of the Democratic liberals have begun to see where this is really headed, some of the more moderates, and they're backing away. And you will have noticed he has slidden in the polls significantly in the last few weeks. He's down to about 35% approval rating right now. And some of that has come from the actual Democratic Party because they're realizing AOC and a lot of these hyper-liberals have enormous influence in this administration, and I think they underestimated that. So Biden will continue to move forward in every way that he can, and we're going to see a deteriorating country unless the people really rise up, take a stand, make a lot of noise, put heat on their elected officials, and say, look, if you go along with this, you're going to be in deep trouble in the next election, and hopefully we'll have a next election.
Gary Kyle with us here today. He is the founder and director of Hope for the World. And, folks, there's much more to be said. So we'll be coming back here in just a minute with more information on this march toward globalism here on Crosstalk on the VCY America Network.
to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, geologist and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, how fast are the continents eroding?
Chris, the answer to this question might surprise you. We know the volume of the continents above sea level. When rain falls on the continents, it erodes them grain by grain, and we can measure how much solid material is in the water as it finally reaches the ocean. As it turns out, the continents are eroding at such a rapid rate, they'll all be gone in 14 million years. But according to evolution, the continents are hundreds of millions of years old, yet they're eroding so fast that they're not going to last. Something is wrong with that millions of years picture. The measurements we make are much more in line with the creation, flood, young Earth account. The continents don't fit the evolution idea, but they do fit the back to Genesis idea.
To learn more about creation, get our free DVD called That's a Fact. Call us at 800-628-7640 and mention the promo code FACT.
Marching toward globalism, our topic today. Gary Kah is our guest, founder and director of Hope for the World. By the way, Gary is editor of Hope for the World Update, and that's your newsletter, Gary. I understand it won't be too far down the road that your next issue will be coming out.
That's right. We're beginning to work on that right now. Pray for me. There is so much to cover that, I mean, by the time you get it done, it's almost out of date. And so I really need the Lord's wisdom on this. But we're going to bring some new information to people that they may not be aware of, and we need to be discerning and wise as believers in these times, that's for sure.
And listeners can subscribe through GaryKah.org?
That's correct, yes. Just go to our website, and we'll be posting some things as well in the next couple of days, including an article I just wrote a few days ago regarding the Russia-Ukraine situation and how I think that's going to play out.
Okay, again, folks, the website is Gary Kah. Kah is spelled K-A-H, GaryKah.org. Well, Gary, as we're kind of doing an overview, examining this march toward globalism politically, economically, and spiritually, we covered a lot of political in that first segment there, so let's move on to the economy. And economically, I mean, this is also rapid advancement that's taking place, so share with us what's taking place on the economic front as it relates to advancing globalism.
Well, of course, a lot of the global agenda has been advanced through the whole COVID narrative of the last 2 years, and one of the people at the forefront of that has been Bill Gates. And I just came across a very interesting quote by Gates. He says, "When historians write the book on the COVID-19 pandemic, what we've lived through so far will probably take up only the first third or so. The bulk of the story will be what happens next," end quote. And so, again, it shows that this is part of a much bigger agenda. And the purpose is to get us to the point where cash is gone, and with that, our privacy, and where we move into a digital currency system where everything is electronic. A digital dollar, for example, where cash will be made illegal, where unless you're wheeling and dealing and doing barter under the table, the government will know every single move that you make. That's where they want to go with this. But in order to get there, they have to bring the current global economy close to a standstill in order to have a reason that's acceptable to the people of the world for why they have to implement this new system and be able to say the old system failed. We're living in a new world today. We've got advanced technology. This is the way of the future. This is how we have to go. In order to avoid the past crisis, we all need to come into this new system, and with it, everybody has to be vaccinated. In fact, I think we will reach a point where a vaccine or booster shots will be combined with a personal digital ID and the means to be able to buy or sell, all through a mark that will actually be placed on individuals. The only possible step yet left in between might be where people would be using, say, a smartphone to do transactions rather than actually having a mark on them. But all the technology is there. 20 years ago it wasn't, but now it is. It's all in place. They're just trying to figure out a way to roll it out in a way that will cause most of the public to go along with it. And whenever you see resistance, like what we've seen in the last couple of weeks up in Canada with the truckers, it will be squelched. Trudeau did what he did because he fears the globalists standing around him and with him more than he does the people of Canada. That's the bottom line. And I think with Biden, it's going to be much the same way. He could be booted out of office tomorrow, again, with all the blackmail they have on him, if he doesn't do what the globalists want him to do. So I think he's probably going to stand firm coming down the pike here if anything similar happens in this country as what we saw in Canada. So the only political response that might be able to delay this with God's help to put a slowdown on the economic progress that they're making toward their goals is if we, the people, put an enormous amount of pressure on our elected officials in every state at the congressional level, our House representatives as well as our senators, letting them know that we will not stand with them if they move forward with this. Beyond that, it's pretty much a done deal. I believe the decisions have been made. I don't think those decisions are going to be changed. It's just a matter of how fast they can roll all of this out and the best way to do it from their standpoint.
Gary, how critical do you see the November 2022 election?
If we get there, and again, I hope we do, but I also realize that, martial law is a very real possibility between now and then. I hope that doesn't happen. But assuming we get to November and we take back 4 or 5 seats in the Senate and take a strong majority in the House for conservatives, that would definitely slow down this agenda. However, even then, there are people, Republicans, who support the idea of going to a cashless society. They say, what's wrong with technology? So they may actually take steps in that direction as long as they perceive that it's not totally draconian. And so you have to look at who our elected officials and those running for office are getting money from. If they're getting any money from Soros or people from that camp, some of the socialists, even if they're talking a good talk, don't vote for them. Because when push comes to shove, they're going to help bring this agenda in. So we can't just assume because a person is running on the Republican ticket that they're going to be opposed to this agenda. Mm-hmm. You see people going back and forth, talking out of both sides of their mouths, whatever is convenient at the time, they'll tell you just to get reelected. And unfortunately, a good many people in Washington, that's pretty much where they're at. They enjoy the power and the prestige, and they've got big egos. And so a lot has to come together just right for conservatives to truly take back our Congress. And the Supreme Court could do a lot, to stop some of these things. But so far, I've been disappointed, and I think you have too. I mean, we've won some victories for conservatives, to be sure, but still not enough to really turn things around. And I've had some real doubts and disappointments with Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, more than any of the others, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So we can't rely on the Supreme Court, is what I'm saying. This needs to be legislated through Congress, which will carry a lot more weight. And so, again, if enough people get serious about this and realize, it's now or never, we've got to take a stand and put ourselves on the line. And even if that means we get put on a list somewhere, to be attacked by globalists down the road, if we lose our country anyway to globalists and we're going to lose our freedoms, we might as well take a stand now and hope that with God's help we can slow things down a bit.
You were talking, Gary, as we were talking about this globalist plan here for a cashless society, and some people scratch their heads here, wonder that, but think of all the electronic transactions that are taking place today compared to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but also to understand that this is a globalist agenda, meaning that there are countries that are far ahead of the U.S. in going cashless.
You're exactly right. Yeah, there are countries in the world where 90% of all transactions now are electronic, and the U.S. isn't actually that far behind. I mean, most people now, if they go into a restaurant, everything's on credit card. Mm-hmm. Not that much cash is used anymore. So it's been a gradual, drip, drip, drip effect that people have gotten used to, and it is very convenient. And that's one of the things that the globalists are going to use to try to bring the system in, since we're just a step or two away from it anyway. But when you lose cash, you really do lose a good part of your freedom, because now the government is going to know every single move that you make. They're going to know what organizations you contribute to. They're going to know what groceries you buy, everything that you own, even down to just the few dollars that you spend every day. They will know everything about everything that you do. And so if you want to make a purchase that you don't want them to know of, because let's say they are an all-out socialist government and you don't want them to know certain things about you, you no longer will have that recourse, because it's going to be fully electronic, and they'll know it. I mean, it's a scary thing, really. If our hope wasn't in the Lord and that our eternity is secure in Him, this is scary stuff. It really is. It's the kind of stuff that Orwell wrote about, in his book 1984, and now it's here, and I think it's even going beyond some of the things that he suspected. The social credit system that China is operating under is something that we can expect to happen here. Once the government knows every transaction, they basically at that point know everything about you. And so you can get credit or be deducted credit points depending on what you do with your money. And they can literally use that to shut you out of certain institutions or certain rights that we've always had. And so really, ultimately, it's about power and control. And the best way for them to achieve that is through a cashless electronic currency system. And it may be based on cryptocurrency, but it doesn't necessarily have to be based on crypto. It seems that that's the direction that we're going in, but it can be done without crypto.
Gary Ka is with us here today. Again, his newsletter is soon to come out, and you can check it out. Subscription information, GaryKah.org. That's K-A-H. For the sake of time, we're going to move on to the third area as well, because we know one day there's going to be a worldwide religion to worship the one known as Antichrist, one who is not only there in the place of Christ, but also one who is against Christ. But, Gary, I understand globalism is also advancing on the religious front.
That's right. We've got Pope Francis very much involved in that effort, and he has been involved in building a center in the United Arab Emirates, and this being called the Abrahamic House. And you've got an Islamic mosque, a Jewish synagogue, and a Christian church, all located on the same complex, together with a type of convention center. This thing is being built right now, and it's almost completed. It will be completed this year. And I believe that's a precursor of what eventually something similar that will occur in Jerusalem. But for right now, it's being in the UAE. So people need to be aware of that. In fact, you can read the article. I posted it on our website. It's called Pope Francis Facilitating the Globalist Agenda. And we actually have pictures in there, the pictorial rendering of what this complex will look like when it's finished. And Pope Francis has been helping to coordinate and oversee this project together with a very powerful Islamic cleric by the name of Imam Ahmed al-Tayyib from Egypt. And those two, more than any others, have been at the forefront of this. And this whole effort grew out of a document that they jointly drafted called A Document of Human Fraternity for World Peace and Living Together. And so this is a big part of the globalist agenda, because if you have different religions in the world with conflicting views, it's difficult to have a global society, a one-world government, New World Order system. And so Pope Francis has really been pushing interfaithism, the merging of all the world's religions coming together under one umbrella that will also include a political one-worldism and a one-world economy. And it's interesting, this current pope has been very active politically and on the economic front as well. And last year I wrote an article on that.
I'll tell you what, we're going to have to interrupt you there, Gary, and I apologize for that, but we're up against a break. Folks, back in 1 minute. Don't miss our next segment here on Crosstalk.
From Ray Comfort and Living Waters comes the dramatic film Audacity, tackling a very divisive issue today, homosexuality. Challenged by a co-worker to defend his convictions about homosexuality and same-sex marriage, Peter has to consider if he has the courage to stand for what he believes, even at the risk of losing a friendship. How will he respond when faced with a harrowing life or death experience? Audacity uses a unique approach to address a very contemporary issue and challenges the viewer to reach out and approach the greatest spiritual need everyone faces. Audacity is a 55-minute powerful dramatic film that will impact your life. Get your copy of Audacity for a donation of $5 or 5 copies for a donation of $18. 10 copies for $25 when you call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
Time goes so fast, but so does this bid for globalism, folks. Marching toward globalism, our topic today here on Crosstalk. Gary Kah is with us today. He is founder and director of Hope for the World and editor of Hope for the World Update. Gary has long been following this march toward globalism, and even as he wrote his early books and was a Middle East trade specialist for the state government in Indiana. So all of this coming together, folks, now for decades, but it has the common goal. Sometimes it's delayed. The former presidency delayed things. Roadblocks were put in place, and now those roadblocks are removed, and the advancement is taking place. Gary, very briefly here, examining this march toward globalism that's taken place politically. We looked also economically in brief, and right now spiritually. And Gary, you were just talking as we're going into this last break here about this interfaithism that's being promoted very much here by the Pope and other religious groups as well.
Yeah, that's a huge part of this agenda, maybe the biggest ultimately. I think that's where the globalists have had their biggest challenge is trying to bring the religions of the world together. And some people might say, well, what's wrong with unity? Well, if it's unity centered on the truth, nothing. But when it's centered on a deception and lies, God won't stand for that. I remember at the building of the Tower of Babel, it was God who intervened and dispersed the people, causing them to speak different languages, because the unity that was taking place, there was a false unity that would have been very dangerous and bring about a global dictatorship of its time. And so God intervened. Lately, some conservative Catholics have been pushing back against the current Pope, realizing what he's up to. And Jim, you know this. One of the most outspoken voices is the Vatican insider Archbishop Carlo Vigano,
yes,
who I've quoted in a number of my articles. He's openly opposed Pope Francis and his accomplices really for about 2 years now, even accusing Pope Francis of being the spiritual leader of the globalist movement. And I want to quote him briefly here. He says, "Supranational organizations financed in large measure by the conspirators of this coup d'etat are interfering in the government of individual nations and in the lives, relationships, and health of billions of people. They are doing it for money, certainly, but even more so in order to centralize power so as to establish a planetary dictatorship. It is the Great Reset of World Economic Forum, the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. It is the plan of the New World Order in which a universal republic enslaves everyone and a religion of humanity cancels faith in Christ."
Wow.
End quote.
Wow.
So, thankfully some Catholics are waking up to this and are putting pressure in their own way on this Pope, but do not underestimate him. He is the Pope that globalists wanted in place for a long time. He's completely sold out to this cause, and I would be surprised if he turns to the left or right. I mean, miracles can happen, but so far there are no signs of him turning from it. I believe he's going to go full steam ahead with this agenda.
Gary Carr, our guest here. Friends, our phone number to Crosstalk is 800-733-9829. If you have a question for Gary today, 800-733-9829. Gary, as we've talked about this march toward globalism, politically, economically, spiritually, and I know things go so far more in depth than what we've been able to here on the program today. But this is not a time for people to despair. I mean, it sounds frightening, all these things that are going on. But I know, I mean, even your organization named Hope for the World, that's really what you believe from your heart. Believers in Christ don't need to fear in such a time as this. That's
correct. We have to be discerning. We have to be bold as never before in our pursuit to do what's right before God. And I'm reminded of Ephesians 5:11, which instructs us to have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. And then also 1 Corinthians 16:13. In that passage, we're told, be on your guard, stand firm in the faith, be men of courage, be strong. And those instructions apply to our Christian brothers and sisters all around the world, not just to us. And another passage that has spoken to me in the last couple of days, because I myself, we spend hours studying this every day, and it's easy to become disillusioned or become fearful. And so I've been hanging on to this Bible verse, Nahum 1:7. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. So may we be those who trust in him first and foremost and not fear the forces of this world and what they can do to us. And by being bold and strong and being salt and light and taking a strong stand, it's a testimony to the others out there to show them that we believe in an eternal power, our Lord God, who can conquer all things, and we have our secure eternity in him no matter what happens in this world. And that strong belief is what gave the early church the ability to stand firm through immense persecution. And so I just pray that listeners of this program today would take that to heart and to be walking more closely with the Lord today than ever before. And if you've distanced yourself from the Lord and have gotten sidetracked over the last year or two, caught up in the cares of this world, now is the time to draw near, get on your knees before the Lord, and really tighten your relationship with him, because in the days ahead, we're going to have to be closer to the Lord than ever before and completely depend on him.
Amen. Folks, our number to Crosstalk, 800-733-9829. Let's go to Gregory, South Dakota. Wayne, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I was wondering what Gary thinks about the scenario. I mean, if we would have a fair midterm election and then presidential election, and if conservatives would take back House and Senate and White House and grow a spine and become patriots and really actually fight the globalists, could people like Klaus Schwab and Bill Gates and Anthony Fauci and George Soros and other people like that, couldn't they be apprehended and charged with true subversion of our Constitution, our republic? And how, in your estimation, how easy would it be to, like, SEAL Team 6 go in and take them? Or do they have such an extensive security system that would...
And Wayne, I'm going to have Gary respond because your question's going longer and longer here. But so you're asking about elections, then you're asking about apprehensions. Gary, as even if things have come about with the Clintons, have we ever seen anything like that before?
Well,
I mean, there's a lot of...
That's why I'm not very hopeful of that taking place because of the corruption of our court system. I mean, so much evidence has already come out. There should be numerous people in jail already, and they're not. A couple of them have gotten a slap on the wrist, and that's about it. So a lot of this depends on our court system unless Congress takes it upon itself to actually prosecute these individuals and serve a sentence, which would probably be a first. But Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, and others who have networked with them. Fauci, I believe they're deserving of jail time, no question about it. I mean, the fraud that has been perpetrated against the American people through this health crisis and what they really want to accomplish through it, and the people who have died because of it. There's never been anything on this level that has happened that people have gotten away with. And you may be aware of the fact that there has been a tribunal of sorts that just ended that has went on for over a week with experts, economic experts, health experts, doctors, attorneys, dozens of people testifying about these very things. And these are all on the record now. We're aware and fully aware of the corruption of these people and their allies. But so far, nobody has gone to jail. However, it is possible, if Congress changes hands, that could happen. I mean, there is that possibility. And so I believe the globalists are going to do everything in their power, everything possible between now and the elections to put the remaining pieces of their agenda in place for that very reason. And if we do get to the elections and they go to conservatives and conservatives take over, remember, from the time of the election until people take their seats of power, you have a couple of months that pass there where the socialists would still be in control. Mm-hmm. So even, that could be a very dicey time. So hopefully, we'll get through next January with a new Congress in place. That would be wonderful. That's what I'm praying for and hoping for. But there's a lot of corruption that would have to be brought down for that to happen.
Wayne, thank you for the call. Robert is next in Racine. You're on the air.
Yes, I'm not sure. There's kind of three angles my comment/question would be about, but America-wise, Amazon building a replica of the Tower of Babel, and his summary, Gary, what would be your summary of their reasoning to do that? I know it's a global commerce mentality, but if I could go to Russia, moving the troops, it's the coastal area that Ukraine is, so would that be a movement to have quicker access into the Middle East? Then another phase is my mom has a book that says Iraq will be destroyed first in the next succession of prophetic events, and I don't think that makes sense because Babylon is destroyed twice or something like that in Revelation, but I don't foresee it first, or I'm confused about that.
Okay,
but anyway.
Okay.
Go
well,
ahead, Gary.
Amazon is for all practical purposes close to a monopoly, and I think almost everybody to some extent now has things delivered at their doorstep from Amazon, and it's a pretty good deal the way it works. But what happens once that monopoly is full complete? Then Amazon can charge whatever they want to, and they're definitely a globalist player in all of this as well. So you hate to see any time when one or two or three corporations dominate an entire economic sector, and we see that happening now. As far as the Ukraine and Russia war goes, Russia, if they move any further, will have complete control of the Black Sea, which would only put one country between them and Israel and the rest of the Middle East, and that country would be Turkey. And I would propose that it would not be that difficult for Putin to persuade Turkey to become a close ally of Russia if he offers them certain incentives. And Turkey is already strongly against Israel, which wasn't the case 10 years ago, but it is now. And so things are shaping up. And in Syria, you have Iran supplying Syria. There are Iranian advisors in Syria. Iran and Russia have drawn closer to each other. Iraq stands in between. However, more and more they've moved in the direction of Iran, so they are no longer, I don't believe, viewed as a major obstacle in all of this. But for the first time, perhaps since Bible times, you've got all the way from Persia, which was Afghanistan and Iran, through Iraq, into Syria, Lebanon, a straight shot right into Israel from the east, and now also from the north coming down from Russia. So I do believe for those students of Bible prophecy, the stage is being set. And with this war, it could be enlarged and trigger a war in the Middle East as well. I hope that doesn't happen, but we're getting closer and closer to those types of possibilities playing out.
Robert, thank you for the call. We're up against a break, but Tanya and Alice, Monica, stay on the line. We'll be getting to your calls right after the break. Gary Kah is with us today from Hope for the World. His website, GaryKah.org. That's Gary Kah, KAH.org. Back in a minute. You're listening to Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Report, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewreport.com. Recently, I discovered a video clip of a scientist speaking at the World Economic Forum in 2020. And he declared many things. He declared that they, the scientists and the transhumanists, were going to hack the human brain. They were going to hack the human brain and control people through technology. He said we no longer have to rely on science by evolution, but science by intelligent design. And the intelligent designer, we're going to be the elite. He said no longer the God above the clouds, but the God or the elite in the computer clouds. And then he went on to say this, that when we look back at the coronavirus pandemic, we will see that it ushered in a new regime of surveillance under the skin. A new regime of surveillance under the skin. The Bible says that's coming. It's the mark of the beast. Don't fear, my friends. Bible prophecy is being unfolded, and it reveals that God is still in control and always will be.
You're listening to Crosstalk here on VCY America. Gary Kah is our guest, and Tanya in Pine Knot, Kentucky. Thanks for holding her on the air.
Yes, sir. When you mentioned martial law earlier, what does that mean and who would be in charge? And I'll take my answer off the air.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gary.
Well, in a martial law situation, the President of the United States would basically be a commander. He would be, in essence, a dictator, much like Trudeau is right now in Canada. It gives the President the ability and authority to do things that under normal circumstances could not be done, including maneuvering troops on American soil, going after certain people that they deem to be enemies of the administration, all kinds of things. I'll tell you, I used to be in an organization that today is under the Department of Homeland Security. This was back in the 90s, and I got a little bit of an inside look at how this all works, and I had secret clearance for 3 years, in fact. And what I discovered, to my dismay, was that most of the people who were briefing us were globalists. In fact, one gentleman who spoke at a luncheon, it probably took 5 minutes for him to be introduced because of all the awards that were listed that he had won from the United Nations. And so I would hate to see martial law declared in this country. I don't believe that would be a good development, and all bets are off if that happens. What would actually take place, what people might be rounded up, put in camps and that type of thing, because under a martial law situation, whoever is in charge, which right now it appears it would be the President, they could round up anybody who is a dissenting voice, and that's very disturbing.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, the U.S. possibly could be handed over to the United Nations on a silver platter, and the UN could basically be given control of the U.S. That would be worst-case scenario, but it could happen. So again, we have every incentive to pray against that taking place, because if it does, probably we will lose all of our freedoms, and it would be done.
Let me just mention this, and we'll move on to our next caller here, and that is, look what's going on in Canada. Okay, so that trucker convoy has been broken up in Ottawa and so forth, but they are pushing right now for, continuing that national emergency there. They just passed it in Parliament, and they're looking for the Canadian Senate to give their hand of blessing to the emergency powers that were just assumed here by Justin Trudeau. First time ever in his presidency. And then also, Gary, we have President Biden now, who has just extended the United States national emergency as well pertaining to COVID.
Yeah, he's set up to declare martial law if necessary. And I think by watching what's taking place in Canada, we would have some idea of how this would be rolled out. And mind you, these truckers were very peaceful. Many of them were Christians. They were having Bible studies and gatherings. We know some people up there, friends of a close friend of ours, who were serving food to them at a tent. And they said on average, 5 people a day were coming to accept Jesus Christ as Savior there at their tent. It was amazing what was going on. This was not a bad development. It's just that Trudeau would not tolerate any dissent whatsoever. And as I said at the outset, I believe he fears the globalists around him more than he fears the people of Canada and their wishes.
We need to get to Alice here in Arkansas. You're on the air, Alice.
Thank you so much for taking my call. Gary, we enjoyed hearing you at a VCY rally some time back, and I well remember that you said, I believe, if 70% of all the people that call themselves Christians were really Christians, we wouldn't be in this mess. And I couldn't agree with that statement more. You know, the Bible has told us before we even take communion to examine ourselves, to see if we be in the faith. And Jesus said, he that endures unto the end, the same shall be saved. And the last thing I want to say is, oh, he whom Jesus has set free is free indeed. I pray for God's will. Oh, that we could see a revival not only in America, but the whole world just one more time.
Amen.
But it does warn us of falling away first.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Amen.
Alice.
Sister Alice, I couldn't say it any better myself. I mean, that's exactly right. If there would be a true revival even at this late hour, and most of the people who call themselves Christians would truly be Christians and be willing to put themselves on the line for the Lord and stand up for righteousness and for what is right, perhaps God would still intervene. You know, he did so in Nineveh. He gave Nineveh 40 days. He said, in 40 days, you will be destroyed. And then Nineveh repented, and God relented.
Amen.
So,
thank you, Alice, for the call. Monica in Menominee Falls, you're on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. 2 quick questions. When you say globalist, I think of every country in the whole world. With that being said, does it have to have every country in the whole world to be part of the globalist agenda? And if there are countries out there that are not, will that happen?
Okay. Yeah, the goal is to have every country in the world on board with this. And the way they're going to try to bring it about is through the international banking system, because all the countries of the world are now plugged into that. There's not one country that I'm aware of that isn't tightly cued into the international economic financial system. If one country stands alone on that front, they would be made to pay an enormous financial price for doing so. It would be the right thing to do. And the United States could certainly be a country such as that. But the problem is, we export or import so many products from all around the world now that we've become dependent on. A lot of strategic products that we need, we can't even manufacture in this country anymore. So over the last 30 to 40 years, this has gradually taken place where countries have become interdependent upon each other. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Russia now, with international sanctions being placed on them and how they're able to survive. Of course, they will still have China as a strong trading partner, and so I think probably they'll survive. But this will be interesting to see how this plays out.
Thank you for the call, Monica. We are out of time on the broadcast, and we apologize to others holding right now, but the 15 seconds we have left is not going to enable us to take any more calls. Gary Kah is with us. His website, again, is GaryKah.org. GaryKah, KAH.org. And friends, you can take the information you've learned today. In just a couple hours, a link will be up at crosstalkamerica.com. Send it out to others. Those who would like to obtain a CD of today's program, information will be given here in just a moment. But Gary, thank you so much for breaking things down for us and certainly challenging us to keep our hope in the Lord in such times.
Thanks, Jim. Always a pleasure.
Gary Kah with us here today. Again, the website, GaryKah.org. Friends, thanks so much for joining us here today on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.